The disciples knew they were in trouble. They were experienced fishermen, and they had been out on those waters before. And they knew that to be stuck out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee in a tiny fishing boat when a big storm comes up is a disastrous place to be. It is a deathly place to be. But when they turn to Jesus, hoping they're going to get some help from Jesus, they see that Jesus is asleep in the bottom of the boat. And they say to him, "Teacher, Lord, do you not care that we are perishing?" That question is not just the central question of this text. I would guess that for many of us, that question is one of the central faith questions of our life. When we find ourselves in the midst of a storm, when we find ourselves in stormy times, and we say to God, "God, Lord, Christ, do you not care that we are perishing?" For some people, the central faith question is, does God exist? They seriously struggle with that question. With others in our community, we know God exists, but the question does come up, does God care? Does God notice what's going on? Can we count on God or not? And this image of being in a storm really puts that question to the front, because it's often in the stormy times in our life, that we especially wonder whether God is caring for us or will care for us or not. Seems to me that we're in a pretty stormy time right now in our world. There are all kinds of storms going on. There's a major economic storm going on. The nation of Greece is trying to figure out if it's going to endure or not. Spain and Portugal aren't far behind. The whole European Union has questions about in what shape it's going to continue. Here in our own country, we feel an economic storm going on. There have been many attempts at recovery, but the job issue, the job market is still very difficult. Pension plans are in doubt. The stock market goes up and down. We live in a stormy time economically, and we feel that. We notice that. I think it's also a very stormy time politically right now, as representatives of both parties batter each other. There's this whole wind of words that swirls around us, and there's all this treatment of each other. We're in a very stormy time politically. Our cities can be stormy places to live in when there's kind of random violence. The nations, the international scene is filled with violence as well. There's something like 18 different wars going on right now in different parts of the world. Religious wars, ethnic wars, wars over turf, wars over land, over oil. We live in a very stormy time, and all these storms that are happening in the public life around us intensify the storms that we may also feel going on inside of us, our own private storms. We can ask ourselves today, what's the private storm that you might be going through right now? For some of us, it might be a marital storm or a family storm as families and spouses try to work things out. For others of us, it might be a health storm as our health seems to be headed all over the place. We are in all kinds of storms. And one of the things that the question of the disciples points out to us is that the storms by themselves are terrifying and shake us up. But what's doubly terrifying is when we begin to worry that we're all alone, that we're in it by ourselves, that there's no one to look to for help. And so the question of the disciples is, Lord, do you not care if we are perishing? There's good news and there's bad news in our gospel text today. That's always the case. But let's ask ourselves, what's the good news and what's the bad news? The bad news is that there are always storms. Storms are just part of life. We would hope for something easy and blissful the whole way, but there just are storms, all kinds of different storms. That's the bad news. The good news is that in the lesson today, Jesus also teaches us three things about making it through the storms. And interestingly enough, in the gospel lesson, the very thing that disturbed the disciples the most, namely that Jesus was asleep in the bottom of the boat, the very thing that disturbed them the most actually turns out to be the key to making it through the storm. They interpreted Jesus being asleep as Jesus being indifferent. They interpreted it as a sign of him being indifferent. But Jesus was asleep in the bottom of the boat because he trusted God. He could sleep in the storm because he knew he was safe in the presence of God. He was lying down at rest in the presence of God. He was stretching out on the strength and the comfort of God. And that's the key to us. This theme of a storm, this theme of being at storm, is a theme that pops up throughout Scripture. The story of the people of God being in a storm becomes kind of a sign of what life is like and what some of the difficult times in life are. The very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 9, Noah and his family. God, at least thankfully, alerts Noah to build a boat. But then the heavens open up and the storm begins, and for 40 days and 40 nights, Noah and his family and all the animals are in this boat, and they are passing through this huge storm. And the question must have come to them along the way. It's not recorded in Scripture, but the question must have come to them. Will God remember them? Will God ever end the storm? Will God's promises and presence remain true or not? And then in the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, the image of a storm comes up again, because in Revelation it's the story of this ultimate battle between good and evil, between the forces of evil and the power of God. And in Revelation it pictures all the forces of evil as dragons or serpents coming up out of the sea. For the Israelites and for the New Testament community, the sea was symbolic of everything that was chaotic, everything that was disruptive. And so evil was coming out of the sea. But it's God who comes to still the storms. So of the three things that Jesus teaches in this lesson today, the very first is God rules even the storms. The storms rage, but finally God rules the storms.